There's a phrase that you sometimes hear in show business, total theater, and the best definition that I know of it is the lady who is sitting beside me, my guest tonight. In a long and brilliant career, she has been an actress, a director, a producer, a set designer. She also has founded and run her own repertory company. She has translated Ibsen. She has written several books of her own. And she has probably known every major performer of this century and a few from the last. From Sarah Bernhardt to Marlon Brando, she has really, as they say, known them all. She has played every role that she ever aspired to, I think. I'll check that, but from Peter Pan to Camille and Hamlet, which were on her list as a girl of things she wanted to play, she has done them. I could spend the whole show telling you about her, but I'd rather let her do some of that herself. It's a rare television appearance. One of the great ladies of the stage, Miss Eva Le Gallienne. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Mr.
When you're in France, do you say Le Gallienne, and in America do you say Le Gallienne? Do you anglicize it for one or the other, or do you keep it the same?
Well, yes, in France they say Le Gallienne, but here they don't say that. Sounds too flossy. Anyway.
So Le Gallienne will do.
Yes,
well,
Le Gallienne.
I may not have been totally accurate when I said people of the last century, but some who lived in the last century, and whether or not they acted. Well, Duse and Bernhardt.
Well, I did see them. I was very lucky.
You actually, I don't know if I've ever...
Well, you see, that's one of the great compensations of being as old as I am. I was born in 1899, so I was able to see Madame Sarah since I was brought up in Paris. So from the age of 7, I was taken to see Madame Sarah. And then Duse I didn't see until I was really quite old. I was, I think, 24 when I first saw
On your last legs.
Yeah. Yes, I was.
Do you have clear visual memories of both of them?
Vivid memories, yes.
Even from even from age 7?
Yes. Of course, it's a little bit like, you know, flashes of lightning, in a sense. I mean, you suddenly see something very clear, and then in between there are passages where you don't see the thing so clear. But some of the things are absolutely vivid.
Is it foolish to ask which was the greater actress?
They were poles apart. They were so different. Madame Sarah was... Well, they used to call her in France a cabotine de génie, which I suppose could be translated a ham actor of genius. I think that's what it is in English. She was a great, great actress, but I think that Madame Duse was by far the greater artist. I think she was extraordinary, because Duse, well, they talk about modern, you know. I don't know of any modern actor or actress that is as simple, as real, as filled with real truth as Duse was. And it was absolutely extraordinary. I never have seen anything like it before or since.
Would either of the styles that you saw them play look a bit comic today, a bit overdone?
Not Duse, ever.
Bernhardt, perhaps?
Perhaps, but largely due to the material, I think, because you see, Madame Sarah played a great many theatre pieces, you know, real theatrical stuff, and whereas Madame Duse didn't, in her later years, she chose not to do this. She played, for instance, the last performances she gave here, she played 5 plays, Ibsen's Ghosts and Lady from the Sea, and D'Annunzio's Città Morta, another Italian play called La Porta Chiusa, and then, let me see, one called Così sia. But they were all plays of a certain stature. I mean, they were good, you know. One
of them made a film. Is it Bernhardt that's on film?
Well, those films should never be seen, and I could beg young people on my bended knees not to see them.
Because it looks like this.
Well, it's ridiculous, and she wasn't like that, you see. For instance, one of the films, La Reine Elisabeth, which is about Elizabeth of England, I saw her play it at the Théâtre Sarah Bernhardt in Paris, and I can assure you that it was no more like that terrible movie. But then, you know, supposing you saw the heroes of World War I marching down the Champs-Élysées on a victory thing, they look absolutely ridiculous.
The uniforms look comic. And
well, not just that, but the whole thing is jerky, and, you know, because the machines, they didn't know how to take pictures then.
I wonder if someone convinced her that she had to act more broadly for the camera rather than less or something.
I don't know.
They knew so little about film.
I think it was very, very rash of her to do them at all, but nobody should see them, I swear.
Yeah.
Whereas with Duse, although she did only have that one film, I think it's called Cenere, Cinders, she paid a great deal of money to have that suppressed, because she hated it so herself. And of course they double-crossed her and kept a film.
Somebody always keeps
yes, and so it's shown. But she herself hated it and wouldn't have wanted it to be seen, though there's no comparison between that and the films that Madame Sarah made.
Is there any way you can describe what it was about Duse that moved you so? Did she have any analyzable secret or craft or technique?
I don't think so. She had enormous craft, but she had such a technique. It was so great that you thought she didn't have any. You know, this is the greatest of all.
Technique that effaces itself or whatever.
You just didn't think she had, and people used to say that. They used to say she hasn't got any technique, whereas she had the most consummate technique that I've ever seen, even greater than Sarah's, which was pretty great too, only hers was visible, whereas Duse's was not.
I prefer the latter.
So do I. And I saw Madame Duse play the same play 2 or 3 times, and I know how great her skill was because she didn't vary her performances. The architecture of them was always the same, but they always seemed as if she had never said those lines before, thought those thoughts, felt those feelings. It was unbelievable.
It's a mystery still, isn't it?
Oh, absolute mystery, but then I think great acting is.
Yes, I think I said from Bernhardt to Brando, perhaps in the introduction, or should have, because it's alliterative.
Yes.
Have you worked with Brando?
No, I never have. I saw him even before he made his great success in Streetcar, and I thought then, there is a young man who could be truly a great actor. And I wish, for our sakes, that he had stayed in the theatre as much as for his own, because I think he would have been really, really a great, great actor. But I think the talent has been wasted, I feel.
Possibly by the influences on him or by his own choice?
Well, I don't know. Of course, I don't know. I don't like to say that they're all with... It's the system, you know. I mean, he was trapped in a long run. 2 years he played Streetcar. Then he was whisked out to Hollywood, and that was it.
You saw him in something before Streetcar.
Yes, I did.
The Eagle Has Two Heads by any chance?
No, it wasn't. It was a play which only ran about a week, I think. It was a play, something about truck drivers, a truck line cafe.
Truck line cafe, yes.
And he played, he was only in the last act. It was a dreadfully dull play, and I remember we were all sitting, you know, like this, and suddenly everybody sat up, and I thought, my goodness, there it is, there it is. It's,
real thing?
Yeah. And it was such heaven to see it. You know?
I know, and I hate it when people say if you haven't seen Brando on stage, you just don't know what he's like, how great he is. And because I've never seen him on
that,
stage.
You see, then he looked very big and very husky and huge as this young truck driver. And then I saw him next, very shortly thereafter, playing Marchbanks with Miss Cornell.
In Candida?
Yeah, and he looked frail and delicate and mercurial and totally different. And he did it just from inside.
Well, let's start a petition to get him back on the stage.
Do you think he still could act as well?
I don't know. Does that dry up in a person?
I don't know. I don't think you can generalize about that or generalize about anything in connection with acting.
Yeah.
I don't think you can.
Well, let's get past the boring question of whether the theater is dying or not. We've heard this cliche so long that to say it's a cliche is a cliche.
No, it'll never die.
Yeah. But it's always in trouble.
Yes, it's in trouble.
Either financial or
and I think, of course,
artistic.
one of the worst things is the terrible prices that have to be charged nowadays, perhaps. I mean, who can afford to pay? I saw today that somebody's going to charge $25 a seat for some new show that's coming in.
I think they should charge $100 a seat for a block right on the front or something,
Well,
and let that pay for the subsidize the people who...
But you know, after all, the theater is a people's art, or it should be.
Yeah.
It's the greatest of the people's arts, and it's awful that they can't afford to see theater. Who could? I find it. That's the reason I started. Even in those days, I felt prices were too high, though heaven knows now they seem like peanuts. But when I started the Civic Repertory, I did it because when I came to this country, when I was 16 years old, I was amazed to find that there were no theaters in this country such as I had been brought up on in Europe, in France, in Germany, and even in my little Denmark, my mother's country. There were theaters subsidized by the government, repertory theaters at prices that everybody could afford.
Why does that never worked in this country?
Well,
I mean,
it
for a
worked with
permanent,
me for
a long
7
time.
years. That was as long as it's ever worked, I think.
You hold the record.
Yeah, I think so.
But Lincoln
And,
Center hasn't become...
well, Lincoln Center never was, first of all, a repertory theater, and second of all, the prices were very high. My
also have
prices
one
were
of
$1.50 top.
$1.50?
Yeah, down to 35 cents in the gallery.
Well, I can remember
had
paying
a big house.
$1.80 in the second balcony of the Schubert in New Haven 20 years ago.
Yes.
But you couldn't see much.
Well, I don't know. You can see quite a bit from the gallery. When I was young, I saw an awful lot of good things from the gallery.
Yeah. But if a tall actor like Cyril Ritchard were on stage with Mickey Rooney, I could tell them apart. But about... yeah,
Go on. I know. You can
You-
see wonderful things from
You
the
have
gallery.
talked about a part that was so difficult to do emotionally that it actually gave you a collapse. Lilium.
Oh, well, I was awfully young, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't know very much in those days, not that I do now, because every year that I live, I think I know less. But still, I suppose I must know a little bit more than I did at 21 or whatever I was.
And the demands in that role were simply
I tell you
stunning, weren't
why they were so difficult, because Julie doesn't say anything. It all has to happen inside.
Yeah.
And it's the intensity of her feeling and her thought that makes the performance. And this, I suppose, is much more difficult than if you have a lot to say.
And so the toll on you was really...
Yes, and I played it for
Right.
2 years, you know.
Yeah. Say, as we were talking about Lincoln Center, one of my pet problems with theaters is why are some of them so awful to sit in? And the Beaumont is certainly a dud, as far as I can see.
I gather it's dreadful to play in, too, though I've never done it.
Yes, I talked to a famous actress who was in the other day, and people around the country, if they come and see that theater, will know what I mean, or maybe they have one like it and won't make the same mistake or are going to. There's no seat in it where you feel like you're in the theater or you're in a good seat, or that you're near the stage. And I'm sure this has happened architecturally across the country, where they don't seem to consult the actors or the directors.
They never do. Don't you think this is nearly always true of these new things that they're building? I tell you, one exception, I think, is the Eisenhower in Washington. It's very nice to play in. I don't know what it's like to sit out front in, but I've played there, and I like it. But it's the only one of the new ones. Do you think it might have something to do with the materials that are used now in construction? I mean, the fact that it's so much steel and cement and concrete and these hard... I mean, it's almost like playing a metal violin, you know, rather than a Stradivarius.
A stone clarinet.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it's partly that and partly just the ludicrous use of the space.
Yes.
You find yourself looking, it's more at the other people in the audience than on the stage. Well, it's rather a local problem, but it can be prevented in other cities, perhaps. If they, well, you'd think since they built that, what was that classic blunder where they built an opera house without dressing rooms somewhere in America?
Ah, well, they've done that quite a lot. They built the Forest Theatre in Philadelphia was built without dressing rooms, and the Broadhurst Theatre here was. A lot of them have been.
How do they get away with that?
I don't know.
Let
They
me
never
check.
think of the actor. I don't suppose he's considered very important. It's the architect who's important.
Well, you would say then that one of your life's dreams has not come true, then, the vision of a repertory theater that was
Yes, this
permanent.
is quite true. It hasn't. It hasn't.
If you knew how to do it then, why don't you know how to do it now? Could you
Well,
put
I'm
it together
awfully
now,
old, you know, to start anything like that. If I were 20 years younger, I think I would, because you must remember that in the times, the year when I started it, in 26, first of all, repertory was considered rather a dirty word. I mean, nobody knew what it meant. I don't think they do much now, actually.
Different
But they
play every
didn't know
night.
at all then. And also, there were no foundations at all, so that it meant having to get money from private sources, from... I used to hold people up, you know, and say, now look, it was right after I'd made a big success in The Swan and those things. And so they knew me. And I would say to somebody who was very wealthy, I am willing to give up 9/10 of my earning capacity for this thing. Now, why can't you give me $20,000 a year, or if better, $50,000?
Mrs. Astor, or whoever.
Yeah, whoever it was. And so this made rather a good impression, you see. And so I was able to raise quite a lot of money. And I had to, because it cost a lot of money even then to run a repertory theatre. And of course now it costs...
Today, union fees and everything
heavens,
are so much
I would think it was
incomparable.
20 times more
Yeah.
expensive, perhaps.
What's the
And more
best way to teach acting, Miss Le Gallienne?
What is the
What's the best way to teach it?
Just to act, just to to start very young and simply keep on acting before paying audiences, being a real pro. Not going to schools, but doing it. You can't teach acting anymore. You can teach gardening or cooking, I don't know, by books or by theory. It's got to be done. It's got to be felt. And you see, you can't generalize about acting. Everyone has to discover their own method of using their instrument. We only have ourselves to work with, and we must learn how to use our own stops, our own what we respond to. And I don't think there can be any one method of doing this. I don't think it's possible. Everyone has to discover their own.
Maybe coaching can be done, but not teaching.
Yes, coaching can.
So don't stop wiggling or
One of the
like
greatest
that.
coaches I knew was Miss Collier, Constance Collier. She was a wonderful coach.
Didn't Katharine Hepburn
Yes, she
study
studied
with
a lot
her?
with her. And
Yeah.
of course Jack Barrymore did years ago too.
Can you remember a specific thing in your career about acting that you learned where somebody said this and you said, aha, and I'll never do that or that
Oh,
again?
a lot of times, I think. Constance was one of my best critics. She was very hard on me, for which I've been very grateful, always. If she ever said that I was good, which was not very often, I knew that it must be all right, you know, because she taught me so much simply by telling me bad mannerisms, bad faults, and nobody else would ever tell you.
You mean specific things like
Yes,
you hold your head wrong?
that's right, or you're waggling your head too much, or you're doing or using your hands too much, which is a thing that I'm afraid I've never quite got over. But still, another great critic of acting is Ina Clare, whom I think was one of the greatest actresses we ever had.
Many of these names are people I've only read about, of course.
Yes, of course, naturally.
Ethel Barrymore.
Well, no, she was wonderful.
You toured with her, and I occasionally heard, I once heard a stagehand say she was hell on wheels, or a phrase that's less printable than that.
I didn't find her so. I was in her company when I was 18 and 19, and I was very grateful. I always have been that I had that experience. But before I went in her company, people warned me. They said, oh, she's terribly difficult and this and that. Well, she wasn't at all. She was very difficult if she thought anybody was a bad actor. She didn't like bad actors. I mean, she couldn't even say good morning to a bad actor, you know. She just didn't like them.
And was
but
rather short with them.
If she thought you were any good, then she was wonderful, very helpful. And anyhow, you know, Mr. Cabot, when you're with a great actor like that, you absorb things like a piece of blotting paper, you know. And for years I used to think, now, where did I learn that? Where did that come from? And it would very often go back to Miss Barrymore, something that I unconsciously had absorbed.
What if they see you unconsciously absorbing it? Would she ever say, I do that with my neck, you don't?
Oh, no, you
Forget
can't.
that.
You don't do it like that. You're not aware of it. It's only years later that you become aware of the fact that you have learned this particular thing, whatever it is. But I think it's the best training, you ask me, training is for young actors, if possible, to be with very good actors, because then you do really learn a lot. No question of it.
Did you have any contact with the legendary John Barrymore?
Yes, yes, I knew Jack, we used to call him, quite well. I think he's the greatest actor I've ever seen in this country. I don't think there's any question of that. He was a great, great actor, and he unfortunately threw it away. But
Were you ever tempted to sit him down and say, Jack, stop throwing it away, why do you do it, why don't you...
I didn't know him well enough for that. And I don't think anybody could have done that, not even Arthur Hopkins or people who knew him very well. I don't think they could have.
What's your theory of why? Didn't that entire family have a just plain booze problem?
Well, Miss Barrymore licked it, of course. She was all right. Yes, I think they did. Certainly Jack did.
Yeah.
He was a demon, though, you know. I mean, it was a demonic thing. It's a double thing, because he was almost, he had such gentle, loving things in him, you know, tenderness.
Yes.
I mean, for instance, his care for people who were in trouble, or for animals, he was kind and good, and yet he had this demon in him that just destroyed him. It was a great tragedy, because I can't think of any other actor, for instance, who could have played King Lear as Jack could have played it, or the Master Builder, or some of the great parts that one can think of.
And light comedy also.
Light comedy was delightful then, of course.
You can get some idea of his talent, luckily, from some of the films he did, but I'm sure it's nothing like
No, but for instance, I saw his Hamlet 3 times. I've never seen as fine a Hamlet, ever, ever, because it covered the whole range of the character. I mean, all of the bitterness and the moodiness and at the same time, the sort of sardonic humor. Yeah. And again, this is a thing that I warn young people about, not to listen to those terrible records Jack made of his Hamlet soliloquy and the Richard, I think it's Richard III, and they are so bad. He made them as a sort of joke when he was either had a terrible hangover or was drunk or something. But I mean, they are terrible.
They do stick in your ear. I heard them as a kid, and I think I still know the line readings.
They're not a bit the way he was.
And shall I couple hell?
That's right.
That sort of thing. It really sounds corny.
Well, it isn't true. It's not true. You know, I saw him once in Hamlet one time. He was doing, I think it was the To Be or Not to Be soliloquy, probably one of the famous soliloquies, and at that moment a cat walked on the stage. Well, you know, this usually elicits howls of glee from the audience, but Jack looked at it and went over and stroked it, and he picked it up and held it in his arms and just went on with the soliloquy, and not a sound from the house. It was wonderful. He was very simple.
So I was right in the play the other night to go and put an ashtray under the drip that was coming through in the theater while it was raining?
Okay. Perfectly.
It's interesting. I learned something from that because the audience came right back into the scene and they were distracted by it. What can you say about great acting on the stage? A lot of people say, I just don't go to the theater anymore. Last thing I saw was boring and the seats are too small and it's too expensive. And yet there is something about the thrill you can get. I saw a thing called The Club, which I hadn't heard of in the Village, Bleeck Street Theater. It's 6 women who play men, and immediately that puts some people off.
Men? Good
yes,
God.
It's one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen on the stage. You must see it. And I thought, I might not have known of this, and I never could have gotten any impression of it from a screen or television, probably.
But it's a different thing.
But there's an electricity.
It's a different thing.
That's a cliche too, isn't it?
Totally different. Well, it's you know, it's like a communion really between the public and it's an experience directly shared. Yeah. For that moment only. It's very exciting.
It's also exciting when something goes wrong. You were in a play once where an actress just simply did not appear for her scene.
Oh, yes, yes. But I don't think we could have got away with that if we hadn't been playing together for about 6 years. You know, we were such an ensemble that somehow we were able to do it. Yes,
you just divvied up her lines and said them yourself.
It was a special matinee that had been put in because we were doing such enormous business. It was in Philadelphia. And this lady had not read the call board and didn't turn up. And she was playing my aunt. I was very young in those days, and I was playing the young girl. And we were supposed to make our entrance together, and the stage was filled with other people. And I had no way of letting them know that this lady wasn't there. I thought, well, I've got to go on, you know, and anyhow. So I did. And one of the actresses said to me, oh, where's your aunt today? So I said, oh, well, she decided she wasn't coming today. And we went on, and
my palms are beginning to perspire.
We got all the laughs that we would have gotten if she'd been there, because, and the funny part was that nobody trod on anybody else's lines, you know, it was all very clean. But we couldn't have done it. She appeared, thank God, for the second act, because we couldn't possibly have carried it on more than for one act.
It takes it out of you, I think.
Yes, it does.
We're running out of time, I'm sorry to say, and I know you're going to do a play called The Dream Watcher, which will come to New York, and but we'll play in some other cities first.
Yes, we're going to open in Seattle.
In Seattle?
And then we'll come to Boston, and then we come to New York.
I've been told to cue you bluntly into a small bit from it, if you were willing to do it. I think I play...
oh, you play a young boy of 14, because it's about an old woman of 80 and a boy of 14. So you must be the boy of 14.
Okay, don't worry, folks. I only have two words.
Mr. Scully, shall I tell you a story?
Sure, fine.
When I was your age, Mr. Scully, I had one ambition, to be a great actress. And so I read dozens of plays and recited them before a mirror, turned the attic into a theater, and devised scenery and costumes galore. One day I would be Phaedra, the next day Rosalind. After that, Camille. I saw myself on all the stages of the world with audiences rising to their feet, applauding wildly. I saw myself as beautiful and loved. Eventually, my parents became so weary of all this that they sent me to a dramatic academy in the West End. They never suspected that I had talent until my elocution master informed them that I was an exceptional student. Then, sir, on November 1st, 1908, I played Juliet at the Haymarket Theatre, and when the final curtain came down, the audience unhorsed my carriage and drew it through the streets of London cheering. Well, from that night on, the horizon of my life was illumined as though by skyrockets. The newspapers called me a young Bernhardt. Managers flocked to my door with contracts. Soon I was acting in Paris and Rome and meeting all the greatest people of my day, Pavlova, Ibsen, Stanislavski, Yeats, Isadora. John Singer Sargent painted my portrait. I had an audience with Edward VII. It seemed to me that I had achieved everything I'd ever longed for, everything a human being might desire. And then, Mr. Scully, the day arrived when I discovered that I had realized everything but happiness. And in 1 second, the glory turned to dust.
Certainly got to me. What is Mr. Scully's reaction in that?
Well, Mr. Scully is very discontented with his life, and she does give him a good piece of advice. She says to him, "Do you know what Rilke said? If your daily life seems poor, do not blame it, blame yourself. Tell yourself that you are not poet enough to call forth its riches." That's good advice.
That's good stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, jolly good.
I like acting that doesn't seem to be that much different from the way you were talking before you started acting. You know what I mean? I didn't realize you had started. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Miss Le Gallienne, even if you don't watch television much, and I'm told that you don't,
No.
I wish you would appear on it more often. You're a wonderful guest.
Well, you're very, very kind, and I want you to meet my guest.
Holy mackerel, that's alive. You've actually convinced me that you have a dog on your lap. That's what a wonderful actress you are. We have enough material for a dozen more shows. It's certainly been a pleasure. Who is that?
This is Nana.
Well, hello, Nana. How are you? I've read your novels. And good night. Good night.